Hello, everyone. Good morning. Thanks for joining us for today's online learning event about the Big Bar landslide emergency response. We are going to have a series of presentations from Gord Sterritt from the Upper Fraser Fisheries Alliance, Greg Witzky from the Fraser Salmon Management Council, Dale Michie from Fisheries and Oceans Canada, and Trevor Bohay from the BC Ministry of Forests. So very excited to hear these presentations. Just a note that this learning event is hosted by Fraser Basin Council's Realizing UNDRIP Initiative, and we are delighted to see such a great turnout. Thank you so much for today's session. Again, a warm welcome to you all, and thanks so much for your interest in this topic. To make sure that we get started in a good way, I did want to turn it over to Greg Witzky, who will lead our opening blessing. So over to you, Greg.
Thank you, Teresa. So, hello, everyone. Greg Witzky requests. My name is Greg Witzky. So I'm Indigenous to the Shuswap Nation. Firstly, we'd like to acknowledge the Secwepemc and St'át'imc nations, in whose traditional territory the landslide occurred, and most of the response was undertaken. We would also like to say Kukshchamp. Thank you to many for the numerous other Indigenous communities who have participated in one way or another on the landslide response. The main goal of the Big Bar landslide trilateral governance response, emergency response, has always been to help our salmon relations get past the landslide. By collaborating, this goal has been successfully achieved in the past couple of years. However, like many new processes, there were some struggles to achieve the success we did, and that is why we're meeting today to present our perspectives to you. So I'd like now to say a quick blessing in my natural language, set the tone for a positive meeting today. So, Creator, we thank you for today. Creator, we thank you for our spirits. Creator, we thank you for everything. Rich Cooks, that is all. Cooks Champ, thank you, everyone. Back to you, Teresa.
Masaito, thank you so much, Greg, for getting us started in a good way and in the language, which I think is so important. So I wanted to start our session today by introducing myself, as well as going over a few housekeeping items before we get underway. So my name is Teresa Aslan Fresco. I'm the Senior Manager for Indigenous Partnerships and Programs at Fraser Basin Council, and I have the honor of being your guest moderator for today's session. I'm joining you today alongside my colleagues Bob Purdy and Nicole Gonzalez-Filos, from our homes on the traditional, unceded, and unsurrendered territories of the Comox First Nation, the Musqueam, Squamish, and Tsleil-Waututh Nations, and the Semiahmoo, Katzie, and Kwantlen First Nations, in what are now known as Courtenay, Vancouver, and Surrey in so-called British Columbia. We recognize ourselves as uninvited guests to these territories, and with appreciation, humility, and respect, acknowledge the work that Indigenous peoples of these lands and waters have done for millennia, and continue to do as stewards and protectors for present and future generations. And I would like to invite all of us here today to take a moment to reflect on the territory that you're on and the work Indigenous peoples of that land have done and continue to do to protect and steward those lands, those waters, and the web of life that sustains us. So if we can just take a few seconds of reflection, that would be great. Thanks, everyone. So recognizing we want to create a safe space for learning and dialogue, just a few reminders for our presenters and guests. So just reminders that we respect each other's values, interests, and knowledge systems, that we listen with an open mind, that we stay curious and seek to understand different perspectives and then be understood, and that we confront challenges and not people. And just acknowledging that discussing issues related to the land, water, and salmon can be very challenging for many. So I encourage everyone to prioritize your self-care during the session and take care of yourselves as you need to. So just a few technical housekeeping items to keep in mind. You'll see that we are using a Zoom webinar format for this meeting, so all of our guests are on a blanket mute. Should you have any questions throughout the presentations, please use the Q&A function on your toolbar below. Those questions will go directly to us, the FBC team, and we'll be addressing them in order that we receive them during the Q&A period. And for any questions that we don't get to during the webinar, we will ensure that they are answered and submitted to all of the participants via email. Finally, just a reminder that we will be recording this webinar and posting it on the Realizing UNDRIP website at www.realizingundrip.ca. And now it's my great pleasure to pass it over to Bob Purdy, who will be providing an overview of FBC, the Realizing UNDRIP Initiative, and today's session structure. Bob is the Executive Vice President of the Fraser Basin Council and Acting Program Manager of the Realizing UNDRIP Initiatives. So over to you, Bob.
Thank you very much, Teresa. Can you hear me okay, Teresa?
Yes.
All good?
All good.
Good morning, everyone. And I am, with great gratitude and in the spirit of peace and friendship, joining you from the traditional unceded ancestral territories of the Coast Salish people, the Tsleil-Waututh, the Squamish, and the Musqueam. I come from settler roots, 7th-generation Canadian on my father's side, with Irish, Scottish, and English roots on my mother's side, 2nd generation. And it is a great delight to be here to convey some of the key learnings from a really difficult but ultimately positive response to the Big Bar landslide. And I wanted to just give you a little bit of a background on the Realizing UNDRIP Initiative. But first, in case you're not aware about the Fraser Basin Council, we were founded in 1997 as a not-for-profit organization that looked at the Fraser River system as a great watershed that required a lot of collaboration in order to assure its long-term sustainability, which we define with this big picture vision statement you can read yourself. And indeed, it is easy to read our vision statement, but much more challenging to actually make it happen. And that's the work of the council, to help the various organizations, interests, orders of government, including First Nations, private sector, civil society, to work together to help blur those lines that divide us and work together in a way that actually assures socially, economically, environmentally, and culturally sustainable outcomes, not just for today, but for future generations. Fraser Basin Council is now active throughout British Columbia, undertaking work ranging from electric vehicles, charging infrastructure, through to climate adaptation, and other types of work around watersheds and water resources. So just to get us started, the context for the Realizing UNDRIP Initiative is as follows. First of all, as many of you are very aware, the Canada and BC policy and legislation landscape has changed dramatically with the passage of legislation with respect to the UN Declaration at the federal and here in BC, in the province here as well. And what does that mean? Well, to oversimplify, we're witnessing a massive transition from old models of tick box consultation to true shared decision-making with Indigenous governments sitting alongside other orders of government. This transition is going to take a while. It is always difficult when there's major changes, always a challenge in terms of the inertia of status quo, but this transition is happening as we speak, and it's so important that as this transition unfolds, that learning is shared, as we are doing through the Realizing UNDRIP Initiative. And in speaking with our First Nations directors, my First Nations friends and colleagues, there is an expectation that the UN Declaration be realized beyond the talk. Yes, it is a UN document. It has many, many articles and principles that underpin those articles. And yes, it means a tremendous amount to Indigenous people from all over the world. And it is at the same time a fairly high level document. And it is really important that by way of this learning event and other learning events, that the UN Declaration actually be realized on the ground in practical and meaningful ways beyond the talk. And I'm hearing about this from so many people from across the province, that there's a real need to figure out how to do this, how to realize it beyond the talk. There's a tremendous need for education and practical how-to knowledge, particularly for non-Indigenous audiences. And finally, it is not lost on all of you that we are undergoing a tremendous change as a consequence of a changing climate, but also as a consequence of changing economies and changing aspects of our society. And certainly just looking through the climate resilience lens, there is an urgent need to enhance both ecological and community resilience. So that, in a nutshell, is some of the reasons why we have launched Realizing UNDRIP as a way to achieve our vision of Indigenous and non-Indigenous peoples moving forward together in a good way to advance both reconciliation and sustainability. In formulating this work, we realized it was very important that Indigenous voices guide our way as a non-Indigenous organization. First of all, we started with our Fraser Basin Council First Nations directors. We asked, what should the Fraser Basin Council do to help realize the UN Declaration? And they indicated to staff that education was key. So we've gone forward with that idea, that direction. We established a subset of our board to oversee the work. And we have some principles that guide our work. And one of those principles is that it's very easy for me as a non-Indigenous person to say, wow, that was a great success. But it only has currency with Realizing UNDRIP if those successes are actually confirmed by the Indigenous voices involved. And you'll see before you some of the beautiful imagery around Realizing UNDRIP. Just as a way of example, we hired Indigenous-led firms, a very talented designer and a web developer, both Indigenous organizations, to undertake the brand and website development. And again, just the main principle, nothing about us without us. I'm reminded about how important it is for Indigenous voices to guide our way. On our Indigenous Advisory Council, we have some wonderful leaders who have guided us. And as we develop our events, and this particular event, I remember reaching out to Greg Witzky and Gord Sterritt very early on. And I said, so Greg and Gord, is this a story that's worth telling? Is there some success here? And they indicated, yes, there's a story to be told here. The good and also the learning experiences. So we went forward with that guidance to arrange this event. We have been very hard at work assembling stories at different scales and on different topics across British Columbia and beyond under the titles you see before you. And these success stories continue to build, and we are looking for more and more to add to our story hub. So I will ask you all, if you have any stories you wish to share, we'll be sharing our contact information later, and please feel free to share and also indicate what kinds of stories you would like to see more of. Some of the learning events we've had, you can see this one on our website, wonderful story of municipal First Nations collaboration to return land stolen to the 3 First Nations neighbors to the city of Mission. We've also engaged Indigenous-led consulting firms such as Gwen Bridge to share the incredible value and richness of ethical space, a way of engaging that's culturally appropriate and sensitive. And with respect to this learning event, I just wanted to give you a little bit of an overview on what we're hoping to achieve through this event today. We're going to start off with Gord Sterritt providing an overview of the issue and solutions. And the team members that were involved, including Gord, will then reflect on the experiences. We'll have an interactive panel discussion. And towards the close, we will synthesize the key learnings and have you finished with this webinar promptly at 1:30. So with that, I will hand it back to Teresa. And I just wanted to, again, ask all of you, when you have an opportunity, if you'd like to contact us and suggest stories or topics you'd like to see more information on, we are very interested in your thoughts. Thank you.
Thanks so much, Bob, for that overview. So it's my great pleasure now to introduce Sakyo, or Gord Sterritt. He is a member of the Witzky of the Gitxsan Nation and serves as the Executive Director of the Upper Fraser Fisheries Conservation Alliance. With 20+ years experience in fisheries management, he's played a vital role in fisheries initiatives, including the Pacific Salmon Treaty and the response to the Big Bar Slide. So if I could just get you to spotlight Gord, and while that's happening, just a reminder to our audience that if you've got any questions for clarification for Gord, please do enter them in that Q&A box below, and we'll have an opportunity to do some Q&A after the presentation. Thank you, Gord. Over to you.
Thank you, Teresa. I'm just going to share my screen. I've got a few PowerPoint slides here that walk through some of the Big Bar experience, and so bear with me. Again, thank you. Just to reiterate, my name is Gord Sterritt. I'm a member of the Gitxsan Nation. I belong to the Witzky Moogles. There's actually several house groups within our house that we belong to, and Sakyo is one of those house groups, but it's also my hereditary chief's name. I'm the executive director with the Upper Fraser Fisheries Conservation Alliance. One thing I didn't relay to Teresa was I'm also the chair of the First Nations Caucus on the Pacific Salmon Commission. I'm on the board of the Pacific Salmon Foundation, amongst other committees and working groups and whatnot, trying to advance UNDRIP, DRIPA, and also just to improve on fisheries management overall for the betterment of the fish. Thank you. So this slide, this presentation is about just providing some background on Big Bar, where we were, some of the sort of allude to some of the lessons and some of the issues that we faced, and set the stage for questions after that. So just so people are aware and maybe recall, that on the Fraser River, north of Lillooet, a slide occurred in the fall of 2018 near Big Bar. It wasn't discovered until late June, when the spring freshet and the snow melting and whatnot started to cause issues. Local landowners heard and witnessed some changes to the river and the flow and whatnot, and went to investigate. From there, we quickly mobilized, I would say within a few days. First of all, had an initial meeting at RHQ in Vancouver, regional headquarters for DFO. The Canadian Coast Guard was there. There were senior provincial staff, including BC Wildfire, and myself on behalf of the Upper Fraser First Nations. Realizing that this was broader than the Upper Fraser. I was also at the time executive committee member of the Fraser River Aboriginal Fisheries Secretariat. So I approached the Secretariat to get endorsement and support to participate on the Big Bar Slide Joint Executive Steering Committee on behalf of Fraser First Nations, or assuming that responsibility then and there. So we did that. We had a meeting. We talked about the issues. We talked about what some of the response might look like, and then we started talking about the governance. And part of that was building off the Elephant Hill fire experience, where many communities around the Clinton and Cache Creek and High Bar and other communities were impacted, and came together to ensure the communications and people knew what was going on and where to go and what actions were being taken. Started to build a bit of I would say, a joint executive steering committee to that effect, with leadership from those communities. And so the provincial folks were there, recommended that we build off that experience and take it one step further. So we did that for the first, and we also at the same time recognized that as having one or two people participating on the joint executive steering committee didn't necessarily, there could be some issues. There could be, I mean, people are used to traditional consultation, where you take an issue and you go and talk to people about it, get a response, and then try to implement some action or endorse some actions. What we were trying to do is, knowing that this would be a quickly evolving situation at Big Bar itself, form the First Nations leadership panel. We wanted, again, similar to Elephant Hill, maintain communications, endorse actions, make decisions, and just legitimize the First Nations role in the response, so that there was no questions why we were there. And that includes Greg and myself and others. And so we did that, formed the First Nations leadership panel. We could quickly engage with the First Nation leadership panel 2 to 3 times per week on a moment's notice. Whether it's, again, endorsing actions or making decisions as required. It really supported the roles that we had in response to the Big Bar Slide. This was not, I got to point out, this is not your traditional structure. People are used to the Incident Command Center system, which does not have an oversight layer. And and they make their own decisions, they approve their own actions, and move forward with an emergency response. And that's starting to change again with the Elephant Hill fire, but also through the Big Bar response. We had the Joint Executive Steering Committee sort of providing oversight over the whole response on behalf of the province, behalf of DFO, and behalf of First Nations. Just a little bit about the scope of what we're talking about and why this was so important. The Upper Fraser is a large area, as you can see in the map on the side. It's a very important salmon producing region for early time spring 5-year-old Chinook, summertime 5-year-old Chinook, as well as sockeye stocks, the early Stewart sockeye, early summer sockeye, and some of the summer, or most of the summer stock or sockeye returns. There's 23 Indigenous communities within that region. They've been working to protect Upper Fraser salmon for a number of years, and including, I would say, bearing the brunt of conservation, which is a result of being the last in line. A lot of times fisheries are occurring up and down from the marine areas, down the coast, through the marine area, into the river, and then up the river. And where the early Stewart spawn, those nations, that's pretty much the only stock that they have access to in that area. There is the late summer stock, the late Stewart, but the early Stewart were probably the most impacted stock by Big Bar Slide itself due to their timing. So moving forward in years 2019 and 2020, realizing significant impacts to the early time salmon returns due to the slide conditions and high water events, as I just mentioned. Quite often these early time Chinook and sockeye are returning at a time when the spring freshet is coming. They get held up in different areas within the canyon itself. And once they get through the canyon, normally could migrate before, prior to 2019, could migrate up the river without too much hindrance. They might get backed up and stopped and have to find some clean water refuges as they move up the river. But in 2019, we had some significant rain on snow events, and also and just high water conditions, extremely chocolate brown, plus big bar slide to top it off. And with the drop, those fish could just couldn't navigate past the slide that year. So we continued. So we responded, and we had a team of from BC Wildfire, DFO, and First Nations. We used selective fishing methods and helicopters and buckets to move the fish past the slide. And so that was a short-term measure, realizing that probably some of those methodologies were not the best for the health of the fish, but it was the only methods we had at the time. And I'm talking about the helicopter buckets and just truck and transport and stuff like that. Some fish just don't respond well to some of the transport activities that we had employed to us. There also, I would say, so we got through that season. We moved fish, a number of fish. We got fish up. We eventually the spring freshet subsided. We got some passage, and we were able to see fish migrate past the slide using sonar and visual methodologies. And so we got through that year. We started planning for 2020. We started planning over the winter for some of the work that needed to be done in the canyon, removing rock, and just making the passage easier for those early time fish as they moved up the river. I would say the emergency response evolved. I mean, in the first year, we took some early Stewart sockeye and used them for brood stock. We put them into a captive brood program at Cultus Lake, and they continue actually to we're continuing to utilize that captive brood program to protect the diversity and the genetics for that stock. But from there, the emergency response evolved to some trap and transport, refining the trap and transport, making it better, employing additional selective harvest methods, fish wheels, beach seine, whatever we had at our disposal. And then enhancement processes, recognizing that these fish had been severely impacted that year, potentially losing cycle lines of sockeye and Chinook, early time Chinook as well. We started to plan for when we would to protect these fish and employ enhancement measures to preserve their biodiversity for years to come, until we could get our sort of feet on the ground and start to plan for the future. The JESC Joint Executive Steering Committee involved as well. I mentioned that we had the province and DFO and First Nations at the original JESC from the Incident Command. That evolved to all aspects of ongoing response, including the migration and transport, monitoring activities, and enhancement activities, and also including local First Nations. We had Highbar and SXFN from Chicago, First Nation, Canoe Creek that became involved at that point. As Greg pointed out in the welcome, that this event largely took place within their territory, adjacent to other nations as well. And so we recognize that everybody that was involved, and we appreciate everybody that was involved, and able to navigate through what could have been maybe some political messes or issues that as a result, but everybody was worked together, and everybody recognized the responsibilities, and so I think it was a pretty seamless transition. We also formed separate technical working groups in addition to the Joint Executive Steering Committee, which included First Nations from the Upper Fraser. It included management and technical staff from the Salmon Enhancement Program, from DFO, stock assessment, as well as environmental teams and resource management, including Dale, who will be introduced later to that. I guess sort of painting this picture and some of the different roles and stuff like that. Was it perfect? Excuse me. No, I don't think it wasn't a perfect situation, but I think I would say, and hopefully others agree, that it was probably the best situation and best response that we could have asked for, given the situation that we were facing. There was many challenges, but we always seem to find a way to work through those challenges. And it included a structured decision, coming to grips with a structured decision-making process. And just a bit of an example would be that we had the contractors working in the area, trying to improve and working to increase passage through what could be a permanent fishway, or we weren't quite sure what that might look like. And so anyways, there was a decision made to cancel the contract with those contractors because of the safety issues and the expense and other things. That decision, I would say, was made by DFO, without really any input from anybody else. But what we did was we come to a conclusion that even though that was canceled, that we needed an additional process to understand what our options were. That we weren't just going to cancel this project. There's a lot of eyes on it. There's a lot of money put into it, and that we needed to have some sort of path forward should we realize that there's an issue at Big Bar again. So we entered a structured decision-making process, explored a whole bunch of ways, had a bunch of subject experts, matter experts and whatnot working on it. And I think, so like I said, we worked our way through these. When there was a difficult situation, a decision may have been made unilaterally. Yes, it hurt some feelings, but like I said, again, we worked our way through it. What worked? I would say, the biggest thing about having the structure that we did was the ability to make decisions in real time. As I pointed out earlier, there was no time to consult on any of the actions that we had in a traditional sense, where you'd go back and forth and exchange information and whatnot. We didn't have that. We didn't have 60 days and 30 days that are imposed on us by referral processes and whatnot. We had to do it on a day-to-day basis, and sometimes in the morning we had one decision that we were going to follow through, and within hours it quickly became apparent that wasn't going to work, and we had to convene and make another decision to move forward. And that's where the First Nations Leadership Panel supported that decision-making process. And just one example I was using was we had a lot of recommendations to bring in the military and use a jet and blow the rocks up and stuff like that. And we considered it, but we also, as a collective, we also approached the military and asked them what their capabilities were, and whether it was feasible or not. And after learning what was feasible and what was not feasible, we made a decision that we would not revisit that and that option. And then we explored other options with the military as well. But that was just one example. It we had ideas coming at us right, left, and center. We had people that were receiving ideas, putting them in the system, and then we would work our way through that and explore again their feasibility overall. So if you were putting in ideas, don't worry, we reviewed everything. Oops, sorry. So I guess through this, we also had the ability to realize our challenges. We worked again collectively to resolve those challenges, and a lot of the challenges were egos. There were stages where, I mean, everybody had a bit of an ego or whatever based on whatever their expertise was. I would say DFO had a lot of fisheries experience, and sometimes it became apparent that it was hard to work with, and we had to make adjustments, and we had to bring this to the attention of the rest of the response system. And I'm not just throwing, I mean, it's not just DFO. I mean, we had some First Nations interference as well in Provincial, and we all worked it out together, and but we had to be strong on our rationales and make it about the fish and not the people. Our decisions were primarily by consensus. As I mentioned, sometimes there was a couple of instances where they may have been made unilaterally, but for the most part, all decisions were made by consensus. And this has continued to this day. We continue to have these enhancement planning teams and even the monitoring teams and whatnot. We continue to work on this project. We continue to plan for the following year, knowing that we're not quite out of this yet. This year was the first year we would have realized the sockeye returns that were impacted by 2019. Next year, similarly, we likely won't see a lot of 5-year-old sockeye. And we also start to understand that those are some of the Chinook stocks that were impacted as well for next year.
Thank you so much, Gord, for your presentation. I'm really struck by so many things, and I just acknowledge that we have one Q&A, but maybe just a reflection that's striking me is, while there's so many technical aspects to this story, just your comments around the human component. And I know that we're going to be getting into this during the panel discussion, but one of the challenges being egos and then making it about the fish and not the people. I'm just very struck by that. And that's always a very big challenge when we start to do consensus-based decision making. Sometimes it's not always technical challenges, but you get into that real human component as well.
You know, and yeah, thanks, Teresa. And when people started to realize that it was about the fish, things went a lot smoother. And started working towards moving fish and whatnot, and I mean me and Dale and people like Trevor and Greg and stuff being on the Joint Executive Steering Committee and being able to communicate that all the time. That was our role, sort of trying to, so people understood this was what the importance of this to those Upper Fraser sockeye and Chinook stocks.
Yeah, thanks for that. Can't wait to dig in during our panel discussion. But I did want to acknowledge a question that we received in the Q&A box here from Rebecca McDonald. Hi, Rebecca. So the question is, recognizing the positive example set by Big Bar Landslide tripartite response, I'm eager to learn about any advancements regarding the trilateral accord for salmon being facilitated by the First Nations Fisheries Council. Can you provide insights into the progress made and key learnings from the Big Bar collaboration that you hope to integrate into the ongoing development of the trilateral accord? So thanks for the question, Rebecca. Just to acknowledge, we will be digging into some of those lessons learned into the panel discussion, but I will maybe just tap Gord on the shoulder and see if he's got any immediate thoughts with respect to this question.
That's a tough one, Rebecca. I would say, I mean, similar to the trilateral accord discussions and improving relationships amongst the federal government, the provincial government, and First Nations. I think that I would say that the lessons learned, the work that we did at Big Bar illustrating collaboration works, and we're more effective when we're working together, would ring true also with that trilateral accord, and it would be broad. It would be and I guess it would be more broad provincially, as we work together to protect these salmon and other fish species and aquatic species for the future. Thank you.
Thanks, Gord, and thanks for the question, Rebecca. Stay tuned for the panel discussion, more on that. One more question here for you, Gord, from Michelle Comeau from the Resort Municipality of Whistler. And their question is, who is / was on the Joint Executive Steering Committee?
Yeah, so originally, just to clarify, you want names?
I'm assuming so, or maybe even just organizations.
Yeah,
organizations, she says.
Yeah, organizations, okay, yeah. Originally, the Joint Executive Steering Committee included DFO, senior management. The members could change depending on what was going on a rotational basis, but DFO was at the table all the time. And the province, again, senior management, as well as myself, we're on the Joint Executive Steering Committee from the start. When we transitioned from the actual emergency response on the ground and moved into the longer term response and the enhancement activities and transport and stuff like that, we basically, it's the same DFO, the province, and myself from the UFFCA perspective. Greg joined from the Fraser Salmon Management Council, and we also had chief and council members from High Bar and chief and council members from Canoe Creek First Nation.
Great. Thanks, Gord. And thanks for the question, Michelle. So that concludes all the questions for clarification on Gord's presentation. So I would like to move us, in the interest of time, to the panel discussion portion of our session. So I'll just invite Greg, Dale, and Trevor to come into the spotlight, or the hot seat, as it were. And as they are coming into the spotlight and getting settled, just a few words about Greg, Dale, and Trevor. So Greg Witzky, as he introduced himself this morning, is from Secwepemc-Ulu, the Shuswap Nation, and a member of Sistelen, or Adams Lake Indian Band. He previously served a 3-year term on Chief and Council for his community, supporting the Natural Resources Pillar, and has worked in a number of roles, many roles, including Fraser River Aboriginal Fisheries Secretariat Operations Manager, as an entrepreneur in the Indigenous tourism and culinary services space, and is now the Executive Director for the Fraser Salmon Management Council. Among all of these, he's also an independent consultant, providing engagement and communication support as the Indigenous Project Director on the Big Bar landslide response, and is in his 3rd term as a Fraser River Panel Indigenous representative on the International Pacific Salmon Commission. Once again, welcome, Greg. To introduce Dale Michie, Dale started with Fisheries and Oceans Canada in 1989, working in the Sockeye Stock Assessment Division on Fraser tributaries. Since that time, he has worked in a number of roles, including the Catch Monitoring Group in the Mid-Fraser River, the Coho and Chinook Stock Assessment Division in the Upper Fraser and Thompson Rivers, and the Resource Manager working with Mid-Fraser, Thompson, Okanagan, and Columbia First Nations. Dale's roles in the response since 2019 has been the Big Bar Engagement Lead and the DFO representative on the First Nations Leadership Panel and Joint Executive Steering Committee. Welcome again, Dale. And Trevor Bohay is the Provincial Director for the Big Bar Slide and Director of All Hazards Response Coordination with the BC Ministry of Forests South Area. Trevor is located in Kamloops and has worked for the province since 2016. Primarily involved in flood response, Trevor was also the Director of Community Recovery for Emergency Management and Climate Readiness for the Interior following the 2021 atmospheric river. Trevor currently works with the policy team overseeing co-development of the BC flood strategy and leads the delivery of the post-wildfire natural hazard risk analysis program. Warm welcome to you, Trevor. So just as Bob mentioned earlier, very exciting to have this panel discussion with you all. I'm going to be floating a number of questions to all of our panelists here and looking forward to the discussion that arises out of this. So Gord, since we just heard your presentation, I'll start with you. And the first question is, what were the finest moments of this collaborative work from your perspective?
Well, I talked a lot about the some of the decision making, also the process for endorsing some of those decisions through the First Nations Leadership Panel, and I think just the participation from First Nations leadership to support some of the work that we were doing, support me and Greg and others that were working on their behalf at the Big Bar Slide, and be able to work with the department, making and the province, with DFO and the province, and just making knowing that we were moving ahead and doing the best we could at the time, and when we actually were successful as a result, I think that was probably one of the best moments.
Thanks, Gord. Greg, over to you. From your perspective, the finest moments in this collaborative work.
Yeah, good job. Thank you, Teresa. Well, similar to Gord's, I won't add anything to that, but one thing that struck me was the willingness for the Department of Fisheries to enter into kind of like a fast-tracked funding arrangements with the First Nations, so that we wouldn't have to wait for a lot of red tape and bureaucracy to get our Indigenous companies to the site and to pay for people's time to be involved in the different committees. So that was quite unique and needs to keep on. Scoop, that was all.
Thanks, Greg. Dale, over to you. Finest moments from your perspective.
Hello, everyone. As mentioned, my name is Dale Michie. I live in the unceded traditional territory of the Secwepemc Nation to the closest community of Nisconlith. I just would like to take a minute to provide some greetings from our the executive head of the DFO's Pacific Salmon Transformation Branch, Wes Schumacher. Wes was part of the Fraser Basin Council for about 8 years. He just wanted to send his greetings, his appreciation for the work that the Fraser Basin Council does, and wishing us a good discussion today on a very important topic. So just wanted to put that out there. I've thought about these questions quite a bit because there's quite a few of them, but as Gord mentioned, with some of the finest moments of the collaboration, in 2019, when this was a whirlwind for everybody, like we were just trying to figure out what can we do, how can we engage everyone, the development and being part of the First Nation Leadership Panel and guiding those discussions, supporting Gord, supporting Eric Beldell, who was the Provincial First Nation Leadership Panel rep, and really trying to bring the DFO perspective, but also trying to get endorsement so we could move quickly, I think was one very kind of shining moment for me. The second one was, as Gord talked about, these collaborative processes with trap and transport and with the enhancement component. In 2019, we were doing whatever we could with whoever would be there to help. So as mentioned, BC Wildfire, we had First Nations, there was expertise in beach seining, expertise in the fish wheels. And there was times where it was very confrontational, where people were kind of doing their own thing, even though the direction was coming from Jess. And, as we moved forward and went to a more project-focused, delivery of trap and transport and the enhancement side of things, these collaborative task groups were put together. And I think, between Gord and myself and the other project director, Michael Crow, on the operations side, we really felt it was important to have a structured process of who's doing what and a collaborative equality across the board. And I think we accomplished that. There was, in 2021 and 2022, we had just as many First Nations as DFO. And in 2022, I think there was more First Nations working there with very few DFO. So to me, that's a way of stepping forward and understanding and respecting the expertise that the First Nations had to bring to the table. So I think those are kind of the key components for me. And as Gord mentioned, we're still working on this today. It's still ongoing. So, thanks, Jim.
Thank you so much, Dale. And hello back to Wes. It's really nice that he sends his greetings. So we'll move to Trevor now on your perspectives on finest moments.
Coach Dem, yeah, way to quite up, Trevor Bohay, Rask West. I just want to note that I am coming to you from the traditional and unceded territory of the Tecumseh, Tayshiquatmik people and Kamloops. Yeah, I think, as discussed, initially at those meetings that were had by Gord and others at DFO headquarters in early July, it was a couple of things were decided, and the first was that this incident had to be tackled using the incident command system. And then the next thing that was discussed is that a unified incident command system would be used, meaning no one organization would take the lead. And of course, though, it was also agreed upon that First Nations would have, an equal footing when it came to decision making in the space. So then, immediately it was decided to go, I guess, instate an incident command center in Lillooet, and my friend and colleague Greg Witzky was tapped on the shoulder to be the unified incident commander for the incident command system for the Big Bar response. And this was new to Greg, and I'm not surprised, obviously, that BC Wildfire Service they undertook this role for the province, and Canadian Coast Guard undertook this role on behalf of DFO, and both these organizations use the incident command system, train in and practice it all the time. And while it might have been a bit new for them to not be fully in charge, to have a unified command and have to share it, it was new to our friend Greg, and I think it was he really stepped up and immersed himself in I guess the language of incident command. But he brought, and incident command is it's really a high pressure sort of system and situation to be thrust in. But Greg brought a real calming influence, bringing everyone out onto the lawn at the start of every incident action period, so we got going, just after 6 a.m. and we'd be out there, and Greg would lead us in a prayer, and and he just taught us to sort of slow down and think a little bit, and he brought that Indigenous perspective, to the group. And I feel that if you asked those incident commanders from the Coast Guard and from BC Wildfire, I think they would have learned a lot from Greg, and that'll help them in their careers going forward. So yeah, Coach down, Greg.
Thank you so much for that, Trevor. So I wanted to move to the second question about challenges. And since we've now got Trevor in the hot seat, I'll start with you. So the second question is, what were the biggest challenges from your perspective, and how were they addressed? So Trevor, you'll be first on this one.
Sure, thank you. Gord did allude to it a little bit, but especially in the early, in the emergency phase, which went until around the end of October of 2019, we were really reactionary. Our goal, of course, was to help the early steward salmon and other late salmon that came afterwards past the slide, and things weren't working for us, and everything was really reactionary. So we didn't have a lot of time to do things right. And I think, there were some challenges. I mean, initially, Gord touched on it, but initially in the emergency phase, we didn't adequately involve High Bar First Nation and SXFN, right? We spoke with them, but they didn't obtain a seat of the Joint Executive Steering Committee until November, until we moved on to the project phase. So that was really a challenge. And the other thing was, because of the speed at which we had to move, we really put a lot of pressure on people. We had to make quick decisions, and we normally not do this, but there were a lot of decisions that had to happen. We have, Big Bar is an area that's been used for fishing by Indigenous people, since the Fraser was created at the end of the Ice Age. Has always been a barrier to fish, but not as bad as it was because of the slide, and consequently, it's always been an area where people fished, right? And so, it's an area of huge archaeological importance and spiritual importance to First Nations. And, we had to put a road out to it. We had to blast through an area of rock that we refer to as the Razorback. But it was a rock feature that was of extreme cultural significance to the First Nations. And, so you can imagine, being asked if we can put a road through it, and they're really stuck, no pun intended, between a rock and a hard place. Obviously has to be done, to get the salmon through. But, so that was a huge challenge, was just the speed at which we had to make decisions.
Thanks so much, Trevor. Dale, biggest challenges from your perspective and how are they addressed?
Trevor stole my thunder. No, I think that Trevor's got a key point there, that was one thing that we did learn, is that, the title holders in the area where the incident happened should be engaged early, but that's probably another question. I think for me, there was many challenges throughout the whole response that, as my role as kind of that engagement lead, working with the different communities and with Gord and with Greg, and my relationships with other leadership up and down the Fraser. But one piece that we had that does ring a bell, or resonates with me, is that, after the 2019 of September of the 2019 response, that there was change in leadership at one of the communities within High Bar First Nation. And then shortly after that, there was another change in leadership with SXFN. And, there was a lot of, not a lot of understanding of what the response was, what the Joint Executive Steering Committee did, the governance, and why were they not represented there, and really concerned about their title and rights in the area, like Trevor mentioned, with this ARC work and, everything being fast tracked through their systems. So, one of those big challenges was that, I needed to engage with the new leadership, as well as Gord and Greg and others and Trevor, just to try to explain, this is the process we have, this is what has been developed based on the response. But there was a huge interest to be able to have an open conversation with DFO directly, and maybe not necessarily in the whole aspect of the Joint Executive Steering Committee, to really focus in on specific things they were concerned with. So part of one of the question is how are they addressed? So, what we did was set up bi-weekly meetings with the leadership and their just representative to have that conversation of those things that are a little more sensitive to them. And, how can we work through that? And that was one of my big roles. So there was a lot of challenges, but that's kind of one of the key ones that resonates with me. Cooks Jim.
Yeah, thanks for that, Dale. Gord, over to you on biggest challenges. Gord, you're on mute.
Sorry, as Dale alluded, there was challenges every day and we had to deal with them. But I guess maybe we talked a lot about the executive committee and the leadership, the unified command and stuff like that. And I probably sort of maybe reference some of the operational aspects. And maybe one of the biggest challenges, and I talked about egos and who was running what and who was in charge and stuff like that. And I think when we did that, if we assign someone, sometimes rather than sort of working through it, there was ruffled feathers and whatnot. Just if I'm making any sense, I mean, if we put somebody out there and they start bossing people around and stuff, people are going to get upset because they're all sort of their own individuals or different groups and stuff like that. And so how we addressed it is we actually started to establish lateral support and leadership. So if we had, say, a First Nations person that would be overseeing a particular response, a beach seine operation or trap and transport operation, we also had DFO and BC Wildfire Service doing the same thing. So everybody was working together and they could talk together and sort of work out some of the issues. And it wasn't all that, I mean, there were still some challenges, but that was one of the ways we tried to resolve that.
Yeah, thank you, Gord. And Greg, from your perspective, biggest challenge.
And Cook Jim, thank you. Well, a lot of times the Indigenous representatives we were made, it felt like we were inconvenienced, right? Like the two governments, federal and provincial, would go away and have their emergency talks during our sessions, and then I just finally inserted myself into them. I said, okay, well, if I'm not at the table, I'm not going to eat. Because if Indigenous people, we have a way about us where we listen more than we talk. That's our culture. So so the challenge was for First Nations to be more assertive and get in the mix, get in the fight, and help create a collaborative approach to fixing everything, which we were able to do, stepping out of our comfort zone too. But that also meant the two other governments had to step out of their comfort zones, because they too had these power processes in their structure that they're accustomed to, and didn't feel good to have to break from those accustomed structures of their own. So we all kind of had to help each other there. That's in a lot of the incident command. Some operational stuff is like finding hotel rooms, finding meals for crews that are going out in the morning in a tourist town. That's the only town in a great distance. So we had to quickly think, how are we going to feed these 100 workers, and where are we going to put them up when there's towns full of tourists too? So just some examples. Fish cooks, that was all. Oh, and I see a question there from the chat it must be from Gord's earlier presentation.
Yeah, I'll get to those. We'll have an opportunity actually for the panel to answer some of those questions. So just hang tight. I'm just letting them trickle in here. Thanks for that, Greg. This is wonderful. So I'd like to move into, hindsight being 2020, and looking back at these challenges, what would you have done differently? And maybe I'll pair some folks up, and because Trevor and Dale, you guys had very similar comments related to the main challenges or the biggest challenges from your perspective. So maybe I'll open it up to the two of you to vibe off each other around, looking back at these challenges, what would you have done differently? What was the learning?
I mean, I can sort of start. I think we alluded to it. There's certain procedures that we would normally follow. So in a non-emergency situation, if someone was to propose some works within the river and come to both DFO and the province of BC for various authorizations to do that in-stream work, there'd be a long period where we took a great deal of time to make sure that we understood the impacts and the Indigenous rights and title around that request. There are a lot of databases we look at for the archaeologic impacts. We really make sure we got the considerations around strength of claim right. We were talking to the correct people, because as we all know, the First Nations proximal to the incident may not be the First Nations who have the highest strength of claim to a certain area, because during colonial times, and as a result of the Indian Act, folks were moved all over BC, moved out of their traditional areas to areas that that might be far away from the project site. So definitely, despite the emergency nature of it, I think it's really important to really pause and get that right.
Yeah, no, I totally agree, Trevor. And I know I wasn't involved in that initial conversation, but I think in hindsight, that piece of looking at the rights and title holders of where the area is key to be involved from the get-go, but also respecting the fact when you're talking about something that's culturally significant to all First Nations that utilize Fraser salmon, that you do need that wider kind of scope as well, and that there needs to be some commitment from everyone that we work together in that sense, and not just about that community and that's it, like they get final say. So that was a big challenge. And that one, just one other piece that was really hit me that I wanted to talk about was, one of the important learnings for me, just as a person, as an individual, is that in 2019, Gord and I, one of our roles was to take leadership to site. You could see pictures, you could see us putting info bulletins out, but we would be flying in, leadership from all over the Fraser up to the site. And it really hit me. I always knew with the work that I've done, that salmon were important to First Nations, but when I seen some of the folks, especially Lower River from everywhere, that were there and looking at it when it first happened, and there were tears. It was so powerful to me about how much salmon truly mean to everyone. You can say it, but to see it, that for me is something that I like to share. That it's significant. Doesn't kind of feel the whole word for it. So that's all I have to say, Coach Joe.
Yeah, thank you, Dale. And for Gord and Greg, hindsight's always 2020. But reflecting on the challenges you both expressed with this project or this initiative, what would you have done differently?
Right, Greg.
Yeah, thanks. So, in hindsight, I strive to do my best job with bringing traditional knowledge and cultural protocols to our incident command. I'm Secwepemc. The Statliam Nation is around the Lillooet area, but I luckily grew up in the area of fishing, so I knew and know a lot of people and culture from that region. But in hindsight, we could have do a better job on making like maybe a cultural awareness programs mandatory. Whenever there's an emergency, you have somebody local from the territory on speed dial that you call in to come in and be the advisor on how to involve the nations. To me, that it should be carried on in every organization that's dealing with not just emergencies. Like how many of the attendees actually know if they can go to a contact in the region they're working in and have somebody available to provide traditional knowledge and cultural protocols and do blessings and prayers and opening remarks at any function or event that they want to put on. It's kind of a struggle sometimes. You're making phone calls all over trying to contact people, you get the hold of the wrong person. So that's the kind of hindsight what I would say. Mandatory Indigenous knowledge and cultural protocols and everything. Nothing without us. There's cooks.
Yeah, and I mean the cultural aspects are definitely need to be communicated more broadly, I think. And then I think really when people started to understand the cultural components and the importance of fish and the ceremonies and just being on the land, making sure you weren't disturbing or providing any impacts to the land, I think was important. And I would ensuring that's incorporated into any kind of response or even any kind of collaboration, I think would be really beneficial more broadly. And also, and again, to that, I guess I sort of, when I alluded to the trilateral governance structure and stuff like that, I think also operationally the trilateral, I would definitely set it up in a way that that is from the get-go, so that there's no issues right from the start. That we know exactly what it's going to be, and there's no arguments.
Awesome. Thanks, Greg and Gord. Thank you so much. I have one more question for the panel discussion, but I did want to acknowledge all of your humility and vulnerability. It's not easy reflecting on challenges and what you would do better next time. And so it just struck me as you all were talking, just the ethic of continuous improvement that seems to be inherent in all of your learning journey. And so I just wanted to commend you all for that courage and humility. To top off this panel discussion, I had one more question, which is around what were the most important learnings from your experience that you would like to share with others? So most important, I guess, one or two learnings that you'd like to share with others. And I'll just open the floor to whoever wants to answer this question.
I could start if you want. I think communication was probably one of the most important things, as Dale alluded to. There was a lot of, and I spoke to it when I did the opening remarks and presentation, was that Not to insult anybody, but there was a lot of armchair coaches out there, a lot of people with a lot of different ideas, but through those helicopter flights to First Nations leadership, talking to different groups and people, responding to people that had ideas and stuff like that, and communicating what could be done and what can't be done, I think was huge. And without those and we had a good communications team. We didn't have it right off the start, and that was it created, it was pretty clunky at the start until we implemented that. But once we implemented the communications team and the tools, things started to smoothen out, and we sort of knocked that off and go on to the next experience and whatnot. So I think communications was huge, and to everybody, but also the First Nations leadership, and the people that came on site saw the slide itself, and then they understood the magnitude of what we were facing. I think was huge. And I mean, it could be done in any kind of situation. Thank you.
Yeah, I'll follow Gord. I guess really what kind of learning I got was just how little cultural awareness and education there is from the non-Indigenous population of our protocols and our traditional knowledge. It's not easy to come by if you don't know an Indigenous person. So for all these non-Indigenous to come together who don't even know each other to begin with, and then to have to discover how we're spiritually connected with the land and the materials from the land, like the fish. It's not just a food source to us; it's a way of life. So, like, I'm kind of showing a theme here in my talks, or getting to know about your Indigenous neighbors, brothers, is paramount to help our earth heal, because we know, we've lived it, and we can all together fix it. So, yeah, just adding that on, Ms. Cooks.
Thank you, Gord and Greg. And Trevor, your hand is up. Please go ahead.
Yeah, sure. I think if I was to provide any advice or learning, I would say just challenge the norms, and don't be afraid to amongst your colleagues to really be open. So we had a lot of challenges around finance, between the federal and provincial governments, and we'd ask, well, what can this program do? What can that program do? And you'd always end up with sort of deficits, or but when we started asking ourselves, what are the loopholes in your program? What are what do you see a potential workaround? That's where we started finding common solutions and ways to sort of move forward with some of the problems and challenges that we had, because as we know, Declaration Act actually came into force after the Big Bar Slide response happened, and there are plenty of statutes that haven't caught up to the Declaration Act, like various financial acts and that sort of thing. And it was when we really started challenging ourselves to think outside of the box, is when we were able to move forward with the right solution. So yeah, don't be afraid to shake things up.
Awesome. Thanks, Trevor. I like it. And Dale, last word on.
I Trevor put his hand up. He wanted to steal the thunder again. No, I totally agree. I think coming from a federal government, as we all kind of discussed, that when we first started the incident command, BC had their way of doing things, DFO had their way of doing things, and First Nations had their perspective. And really, it took us probably a good 2-3 weeks in that whole structure to start working together, and not feeling that you were the ultimate decision maker all the time. That, open your mind, as Trevor said, look at new ways of doing things, and don't be afraid of not having all the control, because at the end of the day, what comes out of it is your engagement and your consultation and your ideas that come forward are all agreed to, and you kind of walk side by side through the whole piece of it. So that was one of the biggest learnings for me, and it still continues on this day to just get better. work better. Thanks, Jim.
Awesome. Giving up control. Easy, so easy to say, harder to do, and just really appreciate all of your comments and learnings that you're sharing. I just see a couple things that have popped up in the Q&A box here. I wanted to raise them or address them. So we have a comment here from Christine Ensing from the city of Burnaby. And they say, I really appreciate the openness with which all you speak of the challenges and high points of this experience. There is a lot of complexity and a lot to learn. Thank you so much, Christine, and kudos to our panel. Agreed. We have an attendee who's posed a question about the Water Survey of Canada website's Big Bar Creek Station only has data from July 2019, since 1972. Wondering if reoperation of the station was due to the Big Bar landslide, if anyone knows, might speak to keeping up with monitoring tools. It's a bit more of a technical question, see if anyone knows any intel on that.
Yeah, no, you're correct. That station was rejuvenated to assist with the response to the Big Bar slide. And yeah, it's something that we've sort of seen. You know, there have been cuts throughout the years to various programs. You know, and that's a federal program that we've seen a lot of Water Survey of Canada gauges come offline in the last, I want to say, 2 decades. And but with the, I guess, the increasing frequency of natural disasters, flooding, climate change, you know, that decision is definitely showing to be causing challenges for us.
Thanks for that, Trevor. So those were all of the comments and questions that we received in the Q&A box. But looking at the time, I did want to move to close this panel discussion, but open it up to our presenters if there were any last reflections before we move to Bob, who's going to do a bit of a rapporteur on learning themes. Don't worry, I'll get you at the end with a closing circle. So. Okay, so with that, Bob, I will let you take the floor for a bit of a rapporteur, you know, crystallizing some of those learning themes that we heard from today's panel. Thanks, everybody.
Great. Thank you so much to Greg, Trevor, Dale, Gord. Wonderful sharing. And to Teresa's point, wonderful to see your courage in constructively presenting what you learned. And there's so much that can be learned here. I'm going to just very briefly wrap up with some of the things that I heard, but recognizing full well that what I heard is just part of the story. But to start us off, I thought it would be helpful, and some of you may be wondering, well, where does the UN Declaration fit in all of this? And as it was noted earlier, you know what, the Declaration of the Rights of Indigenous Peoples Act wasn't even law when this event happened. Yet, serendipitously or otherwise, some really interesting linkages emerged through what I've heard with this story. Just to, hopefully you can read this, I'm hearing, among other things, and by the way, feel free, if I'm missing anything in the Q&A, you can feel free to just load up anything I'm missing in this recap. But building trust was an important kind of theme that showed up, that all the participants had to learn to trust each other and learn to trust each other in a hurry. What's really remarkable about this story was that many of the folks didn't know each other at all and were forced into a crisis. And rather than a crisis leading to all the wheels coming off, the crisis was a galvanizing moment, a catalyst to work together. And as the saying goes, you didn't let a good crisis go to waste. Secondly, clearly the common objective around fish, around salmon, the cultural importance to the nations, but of course the cultural importance and other importance to all of us. So that shared goal was really key. I also heard the word courage in different ways of saying it. And I also heard flexibility, particularly of the non-Indigenous agencies to definitely step outside their comfort zones. For example, deploying money quickly and let go of the control impulses that I guess have been enshrined prior to the passage of the Declaration of the Rights of Indigenous Peoples Act, for example. And that crisis really did force everyone to work together. And indeed, I heard just in the prep for this meeting, as a by the way, that it really acted as the catalyst for the non-Indigenous agencies to work with each other. And communications is so important in a time of crisis, but it's really important in any case. And I heard that there were lots of storming examples, some conflicts that emerged, the armchair quarterbacks, the new people that showed up, and communications is the only way, really, effective communications and regular communications to help transition from those storming stages to the more norming stages. And the need for cultural sensitivity and the willingness and the openness of the non-Indigenous participants to participate in ceremony and other cultural practices. Those are just a few examples, and feel free to load up the hopper in the Q&A if there's anything that really leapt out for you as the participants in listening to this story. And we will be, of course, watching this video very carefully to divine other learnings from this experience. So, as I mentioned, DRIPA wasn't even passed when this work started, when the crisis happened. But just a few articles, and by the way, the declaration is an entire document, and unbundling specific articles is fine, but as long as it's within the context of the overarching declaration and all of the rights that are articulated therein. But clearly, Article 18 leaps out for me, the right to participate in decision making. Not as a tick box consultation type arrangement, but really true decision making as an order of Canadian government. The importance in that decision making circle to say yes, no, or maybe, free, prior, and informed consent. And Greg, you mentioned it, the important connection that Indigenous peoples have to the land, that distinctive spiritual relationship, and the role and responsibilities and rights of Indigenous people to uphold the responsibilities to care for Mother Earth for the benefit of all future generations. And along the same lines, Article 25, the right to conservation and protection of the environment and productive capacity thereof. And 32, the right to determine and develop priorities and strategies for the development or use of lands or territories and other resources. So that's just a very small subset of what came out of this discussion for me. And I know I probably missed something, but again, I hold my hands up to all of the speakers for sharing your insights in a courageous way today. And hopefully you will have inspired others who have joined this call to learn from your experience and also apply what you learned in their work. So with that, back to you, Teresa. Thank you.
Thanks so much, Bob. And I see Greg has got his hand up. You've inspired Greg. Go for it, Greg.
Yeah, thanks, Bob. Yeah, UNDRIP is important. The articles are all important. I just want to, with a grain of salt, some people do take it with a different view, especially a lot of Indigenous people, because Article 46 is kind of gives the state an option to not enter into UNDRIP. So that's important to remember for everybody too. It's another one of those last minute, keep the power in our hands articles. So that's why I'm on the fence for that, for UNDRIP.
Thank you for raising that, Greg. Important point to note. And maybe something that struck me as Bob was talking is, in addition to building trust, I definitely heard a lot around the importance of relationship and respect and reciprocity. I saw those three themes kind of threaded throughout all of the stories in the way, how did Trevor express it? Don't be afraid to think of different ways of doing things, and the concept of giving up control. And these are all such important elements of relationship building. It takes vulnerability to build relationship and trust. And so just wanted to, Bob asked for more thoughts, so I thought I'd share just those three that really struck me. I wanted to thank again our panel and also Bob for your rapporteur thoughts. And I wanted to move us now into a closing circle and just open it up again to our panelists as well as Bob and Nicole, if you wish to join us, if you have any final reflections that you'd like to share or any closing words, and then we'll move to close with a blessing. Thank you. And you can pass. I won't call out your names.
I think, Teresa, just from my perspective, and I understand that the audience here is really looking at governmental folks. There are some First Nations on it, but I think just as a piece that's very key is to understand and acknowledge that no matter where we're working or what project we're doing, we're on somebody's territory. So make sure that you find out who they are, reach out to them as soon as you're aware of something going on, and start that relationship. See how their interest in it, see their how they want to be engaged, how they want to be involved in the project. And that's where the relationship starts from my perspective. So those are just some it doesn't matter what you're doing, and this was a response, but you need to acknowledge that in the environment of working in the government now. So, Cook's Jim, thank you.
And I would just add to what Dale said that, I mean, and even the nations that you're working with, you need to explain the scope of the project and what's going on, because yeah, I mean, we could be impacting or creating issues on the territory, but everybody relies on these fish, as I pointed out at the beginning, and so it's a broader issue, and salmon are the cultural fabric for Indigenous communities and nation and people, languages and ceremonies have evolved and been built around it. And without salmon, you don't have that anymore. I mean, you'll still have the language and stuff and whatnot, but you're not gonna have that cultural importance. And I think that's really something to think about. But engaging right off the bat, right off the hop, is probably the most important, so we can get all that stuff, those issues out of the way right away. Thank you.
Thank you, Gord, Dale, Trevor, and Greg. Final thought.
Well, one final thought. So, a lot of the government processes, federal and provincial processes, and they were originally built to benefit non-Indigenous people. And so not when you hear an Indigenous population now speak about, we want, land back, okay, and respect for First Nations who were first here. Just remember, don't feel like you're being attacked personally, because it's those systems that we're attacking to break down and make it equitable for First Nations to be able to participate in the economy and everything else that the non-Indigenous people have taken for granted because of entitlement. So we aren't attacking people, we're attacking the system, and we're hoping that the non-Indigenous population will collaborate in that system breakdown with us and create a better, wholesome, more robust one for everybody and everything, especially Mother Earth in the end. Thanks, Cooks.
Thank you, Greg.
Yeah. I'd like my final thought just to be a thought of thanks to all the First Nations up and down the Fraser. We talk quite a bit about our duty to involve First Nations, but when we did, you all just really came to the table, were willing to work with us openly, quickly, and I guess in the spirit of cooperation. yeah, that just really made me feel, really great to be a part of the team and a resident of British Columbia. And I just really want to thank everyone for their willingness to work with us to help try and move forward on this problem.
Yeah, thank you so much for the, Trevor. So Bob, final comments from you, and Greg, if you're okay, you opened us in a good way. If we could close in a good way, if that's okay with you, and then we'll adjourn. Bob, over to you.
Thanks, Teresa, and thank you again to all of you who have come to join us, and to our panelists. I often get asked by my non-Indigenous friends, colleagues, what do I need to, what's the most important thing for me to do as a non-Indigenous person to become a better friend and ally, and to understand this sense of place where I am. And I said simply, you need to listen and you need to learn. And 2 ears, 1 mouth. You have to listen with an open heart and an open mind. You need to be willing to challenge your underlying assumptions. So watch the little monkey brain chattering away at you and saying, well, what about this and what about that? Recognize the history. And the history is not far off in the distant past. The history is playing out today. It continues. The Indian Act is still in place. Racism still exists. There are many struggles today that are a consequence of the past. And so recognize the current moment as still many challenges that must be addressed. And finally, I like to believe that in the world of weights and measures, we can get everything done just by using our intellect. Well, guess what? That's part of the puzzle. But I would leave you with this phrase that I kind of have endorsed in my work under Realizing UNDRIP, and that's very simple. We can move the needle with our minds, but we can move mountains with our hearts. And this story that we've heard today is a story of human beings who have pursued a shared goal, fish passage, and done it in a manner, yes, there was some storming, yes, there was some norming, but you punched through and you got to the goal line together. So hopefully this has been inspiring to all of you who have participated, and you can apply this in your work going forward. So thanks again, and back to you, Teresa, for the close.
Pass it to Greg.
Yeah, well, it'll be quick because in my language, we don't have a word for goodbye. We do have a word though. It's for later, right? So Michie, we'll see you later. Just like in death, you're not going to be ever seen again. I'll see you in the spirit world. So yeah, it's Michie, not goodbye. So
Thank you so much. Thanks again to our panelists. Oh, and Gord, what was that word? You're sharing.
I said, yeah, it's mean. That means same thing as what Greg just explained. See you later.
Yes, thanks for that, Gord. And thank you all, panelists, my colleagues, Bob and Nicole from FBC, and thank you all online here that have joined us as attendees and hanging in there with us for an extra 5 minutes. Want to make sure we close in a good way. And thanks for spending your lunchtime with us. And I'm wishing you all a good day, rest of the afternoon and rest of the week. Masaicho. Thank you all.
Thank you, everybody.
See you later.